The recent announcement by BRICS leaders calling for reforms in the United Nations has reverberated through the international community. This development holds significant implications not only for the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but also for the wider global order. While the demand for UN reform is not new, the united front presented by these 5 major emerging economies highlights the urgency of the issue and growing dissatisfaction with the current system. As BRICS nations continue to gain economic and political influence, their call for a more equitable and representative global governance structure reflects broader frustrations shared by many countries that feel marginalized in the existing UN framework. This push for reform is likely to ignite a broader debate on how international institutions should adapt to shifting global dynamics. The United Nations, established in 1945 in the aftermath of World War II, was created with the primary goals of maintaining international peace and security, promoting human rights, and fostering social and economic development. Its structure, especially that of the Security Council, was designed to reflect the power dynamics of the post-war era. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, were the main victors of the war and were granted veto power, giving them significant influence over the Council's decisions. However, the world has changed dramatically since 1945, with the rise of new powers, shifting alliances, and the emergence of global challenges that demand collective action. UN reform has been a topic of discussion for decades, with numerous proposals aimed at making the organization more democratic, transparent, and effective. One of the most contentious issues has been the composition and functioning of the Security Council. Many countries, particularly from the Global South, argue that the Security Council does not reflect the realities of the contemporary world and that its current structure is outdated and unjust. The BRICS nations, given their growing economic and political influence, have been especially vocal in advocating for a reformed Security Council that better represents the diversity of the international community. The recent announcement by BRICS leaders marks a significant intensification of their campaign for UN reform. In their joint statement, the leaders stressed the need for a more inclusive and representative Security Council that mirrors the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. They argued that the current structure, which concentrates power in the hands of the 5 permanent members, is outdated and fails to account for the growing influence of emerging economies and developing countries. The BRICS leaders also underscored the importance of reforming other parts of the UN system, including the General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council, to enhance their effectiveness and responsiveness to the needs of all member states. They called for greater transparency and accountability in the UN's decision-making processes and advocated for a more equitable distribution of resources and responsibilities within the organization. This push for reform goes beyond simply increasing the representation of BRICS countries within the UN system. It aims to create a more just and balanced international order where all countries, regardless of size or power, have a voice in global governance. The BRICS nations' call for UN reform carries significant geopolitical implications, reflecting the shifting balance of power in the international system as emerging economies play an increasingly prominent role. The rise of BRICS as a bloc highlights broader trends in global politics, where traditional power structures are being challenged and new alliances are forming. Thus, the demand for a reformed UN is not merely a technical issue, it represents deeper changes in the global order. For the BRICS nations, advocating for UN reform is also a strategy to assert their influence on the global stage. As major regional powers, they have a strong interest in reshaping the international system to better align with their interests and values. By pushing for a more inclusive and representative UN, they are positioning themselves as proponents of a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed and the voices of developing countries are amplified. However, the BRICS call for reform is likely to encounter significant resistance, particularly from the current permanent members of the Security Council, who are reluctant to relinquish their privileged positions. The United States, in particular, has been cautious about any changes that could reduce its influence within the UN. Other permanent members, such as Russia and China, have also approached reform cautiously, despite being part of the BRICS bloc. This tension between the push for reform and the resistance to change is likely to pose a significant challenge in the years to come. Reforming the United Nations is a complex and challenging endeavor, one that has been attempted many times with limited success. The primary obstacle to reform lies in the requirement that any changes to the UN Charter, including adjustments to the composition of the Security Council, must be approved by a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly and ratified by all 5 permanent members of the Security Council. This stipulation means that any effort to reform the Security Council can be blocked by a veto from any of the permanent members, making it extremely difficult to reach a consensus on significant changes. Now, if you like this video, check out this next video right here.